Okay, welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
So our mission is pretty simple, really. We take the sources you send over articles, research, maybe some notes,
Whatever you've got.
and we dig in, try to pull out the really important stuff, the key insights.
Kind of like your research assistants, maybe. We sift through it all, help you navigate what the source material is actually saying.
Okay.
Make it stick.
And today, wow, we've got a really fascinating source. It's a conversation from the Dutch podcast, The Nieuwe Wereld, and it features Matthias Desmet.
Ah, yes. Many people will know him from the whole mass formation discussion.
Exactly. But this conversation, it actually goes, well, much wider and deeper than just that.
It really does. I mean,
Yeah.
the source touches on his life after the bestseller, which is interesting in itself.
Right.
Then there's his upcoming book, contrasting propaganda with what it means to actually speak truth.
That sounds incredibly relevant.
Totally. And it gets into why that's so hard, personally, culturally. It touches on masculinity, femininity, vulnerability.
And then there's a whole section on conspiracy theories, right?
Yeah.
Including a specific, quite difficult case from Belgium.
A very difficult case, yeah. So we're going to be exploring ideas about, bureaucracy, how ethics can erode.
The power of vulnerability, which sounds counterintuitive, but
But it's central here, yeah.
yeah.
And how maybe individual actions, even small ones, can ripple out.
So this deep dive, it's really for you listening right now to help you process these pretty complex ideas from this source.
Okay, let's get into it.
All right, so first up, this snapshot of Matthias Desmet's life after the mass formation book took off.
Yeah, and the first big takeaway from the source is just the sheer scale of that book's impact.
It mentions it's an international bestseller.
Oh, yeah. Translation rights sold in 22 languages. The podcast hosts even wonder if it's like one of the most translated Dutch nonfiction works ever.
Wow, 22 languages.
Yeah.
That's massive. And it sounds like that success really changed his day-to-day.
Completely. The source paints a picture of constant lectures, loads of travel. Recently, Germany, Switzerland, Oslo, Belgium. He apparently needs an assistant now just to manage it all. He jokes it's a tiny empire of two people.
Huh, a tiny empire. That says a lot about the demand, doesn't it?
It does. And interestingly, the source notes that even though he might want to talk about other things sometimes,
People still want the mass formation
not
story.
overwhelmingly, yeah.
Uh,
It keeps reaching new audiences around the world.
and it's not just, like, regular folks showing interest.
No, not at all. The source mentions he was invited to speak to the president of Bulgaria, so very high-level interest, too.
Okay, so that core message is still resonating widely, even as he's turning towards this new work. Which brings us to the next book.
Yes, the source really dives into the central theme of this upcoming book. It's this contrast, this tension between propaganda.
Especially with AI looming, right?
Exactly, propaganda in the modern age. And then, on the other side, this really profound question. What does it mean for a person, an individual, to speak truth?
Propaganda versus speaking truth. Wow, that feels incredibly timely. What other ideas does he connect with that?
Well, the source mentions related themes, like asking whether humanity is ensouled, or even society, or a conversation. What is the soul in this context?
Okay, deep stuff. And how does propaganda fit into that soul idea?
The perspective in the source is that propaganda, and it includes other perversions of the act of speaking, they actually cause the soul to withdraw from the world.
Withdraw. So it's not just about being misled, it's presented as having this deeper, almost spiritual consequence.
That's the implication, yeah. And apparently the title of the new book relates somehow to the ratio between truth and the presence of the soul.
Interesting. Let's dig into that core concept then, speaking truth. The source describes it as a practice, but also a real struggle. What does that look like?
What's really striking in the source is how he talks about it as something you feel. It's not abstract philosophy.
Right.
When you manage to speak truthfully, especially about something vulnerable, something you usually hide, you physically feel a kind of presence. The source uses the phrase, something of the order of something real appearing.
You feel something real. That's powerful. But why is it so incredibly hard if it feels real?
Well, according to the source, it comes down to this basic human tendency to hide, to put up facades, what he calls a veil of appearance.
Okay.
Now, some hiding can be okay, maybe even good, like in eroticism, the source mentions. But the problem is when that veil just completely suffocates your actual self.
So it's deeper than just not telling lies. It's this urge to conceal. And he suggests it's something we might have lost.
Kind of unlearned, yeah. He thinks maybe rationalism has pushed it aside and we need to rediscover it, almost like learning an art form again. He actually gives workshops on the act of speaking.
Workshops on speaking truth.
Yeah.
Wow, okay, so he definitely sees it as a skill to develop. What's the payoff? What's the benefit of practicing this?
The key insight from the source here is that it improves your intuition.
Your intuition? How?
By daring to show what's hidden, you sort of perforate holes in your ego in that shell. And those little openings let you resonate more with the world, sense things more finely. He uses this really cool example in the source, The Samurai.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently, the very first rule of Budo, their martial art, was speak truthfully.
Why? That seems unexpected.
Because they knew, according to the source, that not speaking truthfully actually dulls your intuition. That sixth sense they absolutely needed to, survive a fight.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just about morals. The source frames it as fundamentally practical.
Yeah.
It's essential for seeing reality clearly, whether it's a battle or just daily life.
Exactly that. It's about standing for something, not just drifting with the mass. Taking an ethical stand, even if it costs you something in that world of appearance.
He says it inevitably leads to a loss there.
Yeah, some kind of loss in the superficial world, but you gain something essential, something real in return.
Does he connect this to anything bigger, maybe spiritual?
Yes, the source brings up a possible connection to a great and ordering being, maybe God for some. The idea is that speaking truthfully makes you more attuned to that kind of presence. But it takes real effort, a willingness to lose something, like the samurai facing death. You have to risk something of yourself.
Sacrificing the appearance for something deeper makes sense. You mentioned it's often hardest in relationships.
Oh, definitely. That's where the source says the struggle really hits home, with partners, parents. You want to protect them, or maybe just present a better version of yourself. And that creates this world of appearance between you. The biggest barrier is often just trying to avoid pain or conflict.
So that lack of truth, even if the intention is good, ends up building walls, isolating people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He describes it as, paradoxically, the simplest thing, just say what you feel, but also the hardest, because of all that internal resistance we build up.
How does he view his own journey with this? Does he position himself as having mastered it?
Oh, not at all. The source is clear on this. He says he struggles with it every single day, like anyone else.
Okay.
It's not about just blurting everything out. It's about sensing the quality of the words. He could talk about the psychology of it, because that's his field.
Right.
But he explicitly doesn't set himself up as some kind of guru. He admits his own failures, the shame he feels when he isn't truthful, or maybe doesn't even know himself well enough to be truthful in a moment.
That honesty is important. The source also mentions a link between words and deeds.
Yeah, he uses this analogy. Words are like paper money. Deeds are the gold backing it up.
Oh, okay.
Deeds are essential. Words without them are empty. But, he suggests, maybe focusing first on the quality of the words, getting that right, is the starting point. The authentic deeds might then follow more naturally.
So the practice is really internal first, developing that quality, that feeling.
Exactly. He talks about developing a sense, a feel for a certain frequency inside yourself. You can't really grab it with intellect, but you can learn to feel it better with practice.
And how often do these chances to practice come up? Is it constant?
The source suggests maybe a few times a day. Perhaps 3 to 5 moments pop up.
That doesn't sound like much.
They're often small things, though. Like giving a genuinely honest compliment when it feels a bit awkward, or saying no sincerely when it's easier to agree, or keeping a promise you were tempted to break.
Ah, okay.
He calls these moments parcels of food for the soul, learning to spot them and, as he puts it, surf that truthful impulse is the key.
This idea of frequency leads to another really interesting bit in the source, connecting speaking truth to masculinity and femininity.
Yes, he puts forward this idea that maybe the core essence of these energies, these polarities, can be understood by how they relate to speaking truth and showing vulnerability.
How does he break that down in the source?
Well, he discusses sort of traditional dynamics, where often the feminine holds the courage to put vulnerability into words. He notes women often seem to possess this courage more readily.
Yeah.
And the masculine role in that dynamic is about the tenderness needed to receive that vulnerability without, exploiting it.
Yeah.
And then responding maybe with a word, maybe a deed that reflects it back as a gift, making her feel truly seen, like she exists for him.
So courageous expression meeting tender reception.
Kind of, but then he adds a really crucial point.
Yeah.
To avoid getting stuck in ego patterns, both men and women need to be able to rotate these positions.
Meeting.
meaning a man also absolutely needs to be able to express his vulnerability in words to a woman. If he can't, the source suggests, he gets trapped in this ego place of knowing everything while actually hiding his own inner world.
That's a really nuanced take on polarity needing to integrate the other. The podcast host then adds something quite personal about her generation, right, and the pill.
Yes, it's quite poignant. She reflects on her generation, born around 1965, many starting the pill young. She feels, looking back, that maybe many women missed connecting with the intention of being a woman because that natural cycle, that energy, was sort of overridden by hormonal intervention, potentially driven by industry.
And she sees a difference in younger women.
She observes the next generation seems more aware, more keen to stand in that vulnerable energy she talks about, less willing to have it blocked chemically.
What's Desmet's take on that specific point?
He says he can't speak from personal experience on the pill, obviously, but finds the theme very relevant. He agrees we generally listen poorly to our bodies, our cycles, menstrual, male-female energy flows. He calls chemically interfering with that potentially reckless. They mentioned planning to discuss it more in an event.
It really underscores how intertwined the physical and psychological are. Okay, shifting gears a bit, the conversation then tackles the complex area of conspiracy theories, which he's apparently writing about on Substack.
Yes, he's doing a whole series on the conspiracy discussion, asking if there's some single puppet master pulling all the strings.
And what's his basic stance on whether conspiracies happen at all, according to the source?
Oh, he's very clear on that. He states flat out, conspiracies exist, they always have. That's not up for debate for him.
Does the source give examples he uses?
Yeah, he points to things like documented U.S. regime change operations before 2000 Venezuela, Chile are mentioned. He cites evidence from Assange, Freedom of Information Act, showing these were planned, covert operations, literal conspiracies.
So the existence isn't the question. It's more about how we think and talk about them. And he says this thinking isn't just on the fringes.
Not at all. He explicitly says conspiracy thinking happens on all sides, stating the mainstream is crawling with conspiracy theories.
Crawling with them. What examples does he give of mainstream ones?
The source mentions things like the idea Putin personally orchestrated Prigozhin's death. And crucially, the WMDs in Iraq.
Ah, the WMDs.
He calls that theory dead wrong in the source and points out it led to hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of deaths. He also brings up other examples he considers unfounded mainstream theories, like a supposed Jewish plot around Eurosong voting, or claims about Dries van Langenhoven organizing protests.
So he uses these to show how getting conspiracies wrong, whether mainstream or not, can have absolutely devastating consequences.
Precisely. His position in the source seems to be, thinking in terms of conspiracies isn't automatically bad or a stigma, but can go way too far, leading to this kind of generalized blinding mistrust.
And he's personally been accused.
Oh yeah, he mentions being called CIA, a control position, even working for Putin recently. He notes the irony, the one person who knows the truth himself is the one disregarded in that mindset.
Which leads into this specific, very tragic case study he discusses, Yannick Verdijk.
Yes, he calls this a very important case for him personally and an interesting case for seeing these dynamics play out. He also takes a moment in the source to honor Eric Guinan, who apparently dedicated himself to this case and recently passed away.
Who was Yannick Verdijk, based on the source's description?
He's described as a young guy, dealt in gold and silver, used to be a math teacher. Sounds like he was seen as humorous, smart, a prepper who saw societal problems coming years before others.
And the basic facts of what happened.
He was shot and killed by a Belgian police special intervention unit, September 2022.
And the source talks about a second murder in the media afterwards.
Yes, that's the phrase used. It refers to the immediate character assassination in the papers, painting him as this dangerous prepper, complot thinker, anti-vaxxer planning terrorism. The source notes this narrative was questioned or walked back pretty quickly, just days later.
Were other official claims challenged too?
According to the source, yes. The initial claim that he fired first was apparently proven wrong, and the idea he had illegal weapons was also contested. The later consensus, the source says, was that he didn't. He was chair of a shooting club, clean record, weapons were legal or disabled.
So the initial story crumbled. What was the alternative view?
Well, some immediately claimed it was an intentional murder. The source also mentions what it calls an absurd theory, linking Robert Malone being in the country to somehow orchestrating it.
Okay, that sounds like the extreme end he was talking about.
Right, used as an example of how tenuous links become truth in fanatical thinking. But then, the source presents a different account Matthias heard, one that points towards systemic issues.
What's that account? Again, stressing this is presented as a story heard, not verified fact.
Exactly. He relays a story from a contact, supposedly in intelligence or military circles. It suggests an informant inside Verdijk's own association had a personal grudge. This informant allegedly wrote a small report to state security, saying Verdijk was dangerous prepper, conspiracy guy, weapons. Crucially, the report was apparently small and went unchecked.
Unchecked? Why would they forward it?
Well, according to this account relayed in the source, state security gets funding partly based on the number of dangerous situations they identify. So this contact suggested there might have been a bureaucratic incentive to just pass the report along to meet quotas without deep verification.
Wow, a bureaucratic incentive potentially leading to.
Tragedy, yeah. The account continues. Because of staffing, a French-speaking intervention unit, not Dutch-speaking, was sent. They blew his door open at 5 a.m. Verdijk, likely startled, maybe thinking it was a robbery by French speakers, possibly reached for a legal weapon for self-defense.
And was shot immediately.
That's the sequence of events presented in this specific account from the source.
Chilling. What's the source's interpretation of that story?
He sees it as a devastating example of how bureaucracy works, how ethical sense gets lost. A tumor, he calls it, grows in the system, leading to the death of someone the source considers innocent. He explicitly links it to Hannah Arendt's idea of tyranny without a tyrant.
Meaning?
It's not one evil person calling the shots, but a system where everyone feels they're just doing their job, pushing papers, following procedures. No single person feels fully responsible. It's an interplay, reminiscent of bureaucracies in totalitarian regimes where ethics evaporate, people just go with the flow, and terrible things happen.
The host in the original podcast connects this to the Dutch benefits scandal, the Toeslag affair.
Yes, another example brought in the source of bureaucratic paper pushing with horrific human costs. The source even mentions the cited figure of dead and missing children related to that scandal.
Devastating. Both examples, the source suggests, contribute to this feeling of living in a low-trust society now compared to how things felt before in places like Belgium or the Netherlands.
Yeah, a sense that the systems aren't necessarily working with individual well-being in mind.
And circling back to the Iraq WMDs and Madeleine Albright's comment about Iraqi children's deaths being a worthwhile sacrifice.
That's used in the source as another example of how this ethical decay can happen even at the highest levels, and how easily we miss it if our own ethical sense is switched off or numbed.
Okay, so given all this, the complexity, the potential for systemic failure, the difficulty of knowing truth, where does the source suggest we should focus? It sounds like just being angry isn't the answer.
Definitely not. Indignation is natural, the source acknowledges, but getting lost in it is dangerous. The key question he keeps coming back to is, at what level can we actually do something?
And that level isn't just pointing fingers outwards.
No, he really stresses that this loss of ethical sense isn't just an elite problem. It's also in the wider population, the mass that maybe stays silent, indulges in easy ignorance, even when they sense something's off, following the passion not to know, as the source puts it.
So the way forward involves looking inwards quite significantly.
Hugely. He admits we can't know the whole truth about everything or everyone instantly. It's step by step. We need to look at how we might be part of the problem, how we might act like those big bankers or politicians on our own small scale.
He calls it self-ethical questioning.
Right. He suggests, for himself, it's like 70% focus inward, 7% outward. The core task, as presented in Source, is untangling your own singular individual trauma and knot. He says that's the only real way to help untangle the great collective knot.
That sounds less like passive navel-gazing and more like empowered action somehow.
It's framed that way, yeah. Drawing on chaos theory, the world's seen as this dynamic, complex system. And in those systems, tiny changes can have huge, unpredictable effects.
Like the butterfly effect or the boiling water example.
Exactly. A tiny vibration in one water molecule affects the whole pattern, or think of sand on a vibrating plate. Complex patterns emerge, change the vibration frequency slightly.
And a totally new pattern appears.
Right, spontaneously. It's not predictable in a simple, mechanical way.
Yeah.
The source uses phrases like an irrational number or a creative emerging process coming from material nothing.
Which implies no one is truly powerless.
Precisely. The source states clearly, no one is powerless. And that offers hope, because solutions or shifts might emerge much faster than we think, even when things look dire psychologically or geopolitically. Patterns can flip.
And connecting back, he links speaking truth to that idea of frequency.
Yes, he suggests truthful speech has a different quality, a different frequency than anger or hate. It's quieter, more resonant. Practicing it helps you sense when you're speaking from that authentic place.
The frequency that can actually get through defenses.
Yeah, the one that might touch the soul, create real connection.
And this frequency is also tied to creativity and just
Being.
deeply. Speaking truth is presented as a creative act. He quotes Goethe again in the source. As I created, I became healthy.
That act of creation, or just finding the right, true word, makes you feel like you exist. It overcomes that sense of lack humans often feel. In that moment, it's like, quoting the source's interpretation, God says, "It is good, I am." You feel like you're participating in something bigger, the great creating spirit. You feel touched.
He even uses his own struggle with the mass formation theory as an example of that creative emergence.
Right, something that came out after months of intense grappling and trying to articulate a perceived truth.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, he mentions his conspiracy series is on Substack English and now Dutch pages too.
Yes, for anyone listening who wants to dig deeper into his specific arguments there.
And he really hammers home again that this path of speaking truth is hard, but vital.
And that it's a struggle for absolutely everyone, including him. It's not about achieving some special state, it's the ongoing effort.
And one final point about the ego, a really crucial distinction from the source.
Yes, it's not about how big your ego is, but whether you can punch a hole in it.
Nail.
By daring to show vulnerability, your smallness, the stuff the ego normally hides you, create an opening. That allows the ego to become like a musical instrument, resonant, connecting you to others instead of isolating you.
Whereas narcissism, which he links to unchecked rationalism,
Creates this hard, closed shell of appearance, leading to total isolation and making you susceptible to propaganda.
and the source conversation ends with this really lovely, concrete story that seems to capture so much of this.
Yeah, the host shares an anecdote. A viewer wanted to thank their show, New World, by taking volunteers sailing.
Okay.
So the viewer and the host meet on the boat, first time. And in that meeting, they both just get overcome with emotion, feel shot full, as the source puts it. They touched hands, felt this incredibly deep, soft connection.
Wow. Just from meeting.
Apparently. That shared vulnerability in the moment created this resonance, this feeling of being totally equal, completely connected.
It sounds exactly like the dynamic Matthias was describing.
Exactly. A real-life example of vulnerability breaking down the veil of appearance and allowing that deeper frequency, that shared being, to emerge.
It's a powerful image to end on, and the source episode suggests, and we can echo, dedicating this exploration to Janik Verdijk.
Yes. Remembering him in this context of truth, systems, and the devastating consequences when ethics fail.
It really leaves you, the listener, with that provocative thought from the source. How might these moments of genuine vulnerability and truth, like on that sailboat, offer a glimpse of a different way of being? A more resonant, connected world that could emerge if we dare to step out from behind the facade, engage on that deeper frequency, potentially shifting the whole pattern one interaction at a time.
A powerful call to personal responsibility and action, starting within.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the source material you provided.
We really hope exploring these challenging ideas, speaking truth, bureaucracy, conspiracy thinking, vulnerability, individual power, has been useful for you.
And remember, this deep dive was put together specifically for you from the sources you shared.
Until the next deep dive.